Hi, and welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Mueller. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today on the show, Shannon is back for part 2. He's a concerned parent. He also knows Billboard Chris, and Billboard Chris went through some things over the last couple of days out in Vancouver, and there was some violence at a trans movement, and there were obviously some other protesters on the opposite side of the trans movement. It did get violent, and Billboard Chris did take a punch to the head, as we showed you in episode number 1. With me right now, Dr. Ann Gillies. Dr. Ann, lots going on in the trans movement today. There's been a lot happen this week. It's just been one of those weeks where we have to sit back and say, oh man, they're bringing it and they're coming on full force, and how do we react?
Exactly. Well, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about violence. And Brad, you left off the last session with wondering, how do parents respond, and how do dads? Do we take this into our own hands, right? That kind of thing. So we're going to talk about that, the three of us, and then we're going to show the video of the police response. Well, you saw, if you watched the last one, they didn't respond during the whole event until after Billboard Chris was attacked, but then their justification of that. So I'm going to play a little video of that. So Shannon, let's just throw ourselves right into this. Let's talk about a vigilante response, because that's what we're seeing on one side, and then here we go. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think we're seeing some disturbing parallels to 1930s in Europe. I've looked a little bit at this history and some post-war literature around big questions like how could this have happened? And what we saw in that period of history before the Second World War is polarized extremes fighting it out in the streets. So we had the communists and the fascists, and they were going back and forth at each other, and they were using inflammatory language, and it's escalating tribal warfare. And they're using also information warfare. So one of the things that made the rounds over the last few days is something that you may have heard of, the Trans Day of Vengeance, which was posters that were circulating on Twitter. Now, I read in my research Thursday evening that this is likely a hoax. Now, it's not. It's funny with these parodies or these hoaxes that they so closely mirror what's actually happening. So I was able to very quickly find other types of promoted events for today. Today is April the 1st, around this theme of vigilantism and revenge and vengeance and justice for the genocide that's happening against trans people. This can come out one of a couple of ways. In 2016, one of the videos that shot Jordan Peterson to fame, he said, well, you're running the risk, the far left is running the risk of waking up the sleeping giant of identitarian politics on the right, and the very far right. So lots of this far right nonsense gets thrown around as accusations and smears these days. We haven't seen what can happen if people decide to take things into their own hands. And I sincerely hope that we don't, and we don't have to. I sincerely hope that our society can start to see how toxic and abusive this trans movement is and what its modus operandi is. So anyone who questioned it, as we talked about in the last segment, can be canceled at work, investigated, can lose their job, can face social pressures and ostracisms, public humiliations, attempts like I've faced repeatedly when talking out about this. People target you. And the trans movement has very much silenced any kind of criticism around their fragile identities and the unreality that they live in. They live in a world where words don't mean what we think they mean, where a man can be a woman just by saying I'm a woman. This postmodernist ideology where there is no reality at all. And so they just think they can write it and make it up. People are starting to catch on to this. And I'm hopeful that our institutions can catch on to it. I'm hopeful that our media in Canada is a lot slower than around the world on waking up to this, and to actually acknowledge, hey, wait a second, there's 300 trans protesters here. There's 10 parents. The power dynamic here isn't the parents who are asking questions. The power dynamic is the violent mob, and we have to do something about it. We have to recognize it for what it is. People online in the last couple of days have been saying, "Look, this is a terrorist movement. They terrorize people who don't agree with their belief system." So it's like a radical religion or a radical religious sect.
We like to
That's what I
associate it
have
as a
said.
cult.
It's a cult, absolutely.
Well, I've been saying for a few weeks now that this is the new religion in Canada, and it has been coming on us for a long time. Actually, I'll show you something in a second, but this religion requires that each individual in Canada sacrifices on the altar of the LGBTQ agenda, and if we don't do that, then we're canceled, we're annihilated, we're nothing. But you said something that really struck me, Shannon, and it's very concerning. 10 parents show up, 300 trans activists. So my thing, I mean, and it's I said this earlier, and because I'm part of a Christian community and I'm involved in Christian churches, kind of speaking into that forum across Canada and actually internationally, I have been banging my head against the wall for about 7 years because the church, the Christians, now I don't want to be, kind of coming down on people, but putting our heads in the sand. Now that what we're seeing though, and I would say this since 2020, we're finally seeing people getting their heads in the sand, looking around and go, wait a minute, there's something bigger going on here. And COVID kind of helped with that. I think parents finally looked at what their kids were seeing, like getting in the classroom because it was in their home. And finally, we're starting to make some progress. But for 10 parents only to show up, come on. We have to get parents who are willing to get off their butts and get down to those meetings and show up in droves. Like, we don't even have to do anything other than if we would just show up.
Just show up.
Because numbers matter. And I mean, I don't want to see, a head-to-head conflict. I don't think that's the way to go at this point, and we pray it never is, because what we want to do is show up in numbers and say, just a minute. We have 2,000 people here, and we are going to speak, and we're going to take back our children. That's what we need. Sorry. Okay. I think
There's a couple of really successful examples of this. The Halton district parents organized very effectively over the last 6 months to push back against the shop teacher with the giant prosthetic breasts.
yes.
And everybody knows that story. The Halton district has been a laughing stock around the world because of it, and they were completely incapable of handling the issue. But parents showed up consistently, hundreds organized, children participated in this, and were pushing back against this. The media started to catch on how ridiculous it was. And other parents groups are forming, parents groups in Waterloo district. We've got a good solid network in Ottawa. I would say that there's 50 people sort of at arm's length from me that are working on this. And then there's a handful of other groups and parents that are organizing. And it's starting to get to the point where we need to have an organization of organizations to help support all these people coming together to push back and to speak out. And I think we need, part of the reason I'm doing this, in spite of the difficulty it creates, and I pray that this doesn't destroy my relationship with my daughter forever. I pray someday that she's going to recognize what I did and why I did it. Maybe she won't agree with it, and maybe she'll have feelings like that about it. And I need to speak out for the sake of other parents, to be an example. And I need to speak out for the sake of the children who are affected by this. And when people get the message that you can stand up, and that even if they call you names, they're not going to destroy you.
Right.
And it makes you stronger, actually, because now there's nothing anyone can throw at me, figuratively and hopefully not literally, but that I'm not going to be able to handle. I've heard it all. I've experienced all the games that these people play, and they really are. They have very limited bag of tricks that they use.
Yeah, their arsenal is very limited because they don't have truth, and what they are speaking and shouting is just, like you said, the narcissistic behavior to try to actually affirm their own thinking, and it's just it's ridiculous.
So we have a video to go to, right, Dr. Ann?
I do. I have that. I'm going to just share my screen. And what I want to do too, before I talk about that, I'm going to share the cover of my next book because I think you'll enjoy this, Shannon. And then we'll go to the video because let me do this. This is this just went. It's actually, I just okayed the cover yesterday, and then it goes to Amazon this week. When the pendulum swings too far. And so you were talking about the Oakville teacher. I've got a chapter on her here, but what I am just, it is a short book really, and it's just basically talking about what's happening in the culture and hey, like wake up, wake up, wake up. Anyways, that's enough of, that's enough of that. How do I get rid of that? I did stop share. I have to stop share, I think, and then I'll go back. Sorry, guys, I'm not. Let me do this, and then we'll bring this up. This is the video of what the police then, their response to Billboard Chris. You'll hear him talking in the background. The camera's not on him. I hope this is loud enough. Let's go with it.
Listen, I love the police. My brother's a police officer. I respect law and order. I respect our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I'm not trying to be a jerk to you earlier today. I don't think a lot of you understand what I'm actually representing and the seriousness of this situation. But it is what it is, I guess. This is Canada, and people shouldn't be allowed to assault people without consequence, you know?
Chris, but the thing is, right, when we get into people's faces and they get into our faces, it doesn't really matter who does the first push. It's considered a consensual fight, and maybe that's the thing you should.
I didn't get into people's faces. I was here for. You weren't
very close to people.
You weren't here. You weren't even here. I came and walked. I came over to your car.
Yes, that first time.
After.
But the second time.
The second time what?
Where you were pushed on the ground.
Are you kidding me? I'd been walking away from them.
Yeah, and they surrounded
to do an interview with him. They came close. I walked away again to do the interview with him.
What I'm saying is at this point, maybe
they
you
surrounded.
Should ask your brother what a consensual fight is. Right?
Oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. I walked away from them 3 times. They were surrounding me. You all were doing nothing. A man yelled in my ear from inches away, and I tried to get out of this situation where they're surrounding me while you guys do nothing, and I immediately get punched in the face. And you're blaming me?
And whoever punched you should be charged.
Are you kidding me right now? This is totally surreal. I cannot believe what I'm hearing. Amazing. Amazing. Totally amazing. Do you even know what why are you behaving like this? Do you think I'm evil or something for having this position? Like, what's your problem?
Yeah, you are female. And this should be an issue for you.
This has nothing to do with you, okay?
What happened?
Right, I'm a female. It has nothing to do with me, this trans thing. No, nothing to do with women.
I'm talking to somebody else about something, okay?
It doesn't. These conversations are pointless right now. You're trying to insinuate that was a mutual thing. Like, my gosh, mutual thing. I'd walked away from the crowd 3 times. They kept following me. Then they surrounded me from all sides, started yelling in my ear from inches away, while you all did nothing. And then when I can't even get out of that surrounding, and I get punched in the face, I get pulled, you're telling me that's a mutual engagement?
Yes, it is.
Incredible.
You have the right not to be.
Let's leave it off there because they just continue that kind of a little bit more. I echo his words. Absolutely incredible. This. I want to say it's tragic, but it's so much deeper than tragic. Brad, what are your thoughts when you watch?
Why are they bringing female police officers to an event that could be that situation of violence?
Exactly,
Absolutely.
but I have to jump in here because Brad, you were talking about the female police officer, and I'm chuckling because I'm thinking, but I wanted to be one. And believe it or not, I mean, people laugh at me now, but I was such a tomboy and I loved who I was. Hello. I mean, in some ways, I didn't like myself, but I liked that part of who I was. I was rough and tumble. I was an only child, and it was like my dad taught me how to shoot, and it was so you're talking about the female police officer. I'm thinking, oh my, I could have been her a few years ago, a lot of years ago. But you have a point. You have a point. The good thing is, and here's the reality, she wasn't even at the event. He talked with her after, but there were lots of male police officers there. They just did not intervene, and that made me livid. Anyway, so Shannon, you're not getting much time to talk here. Back to you.
So wait a minute, 1 second here. So do you allow the male officer to go up to the man who's dressed like a female and have that altercation? That's a man-on-man situation, in my opinion. That individual should be treated like a man. Do you send a woman to go do that?
Well, there you go. That's a question.
I think the question is kind of moot because the police are just as bullied and intimidated by any kind of interactions with trans-identified people as everyone else. And they're getting all kinds of trainings, and they know that even if they're arresting people who are violent like this person was, that they're going to be back out on the street within a couple of hours. We're hearing all kinds of stories like this from Vancouver, where basically 40 people in Vancouver are responsible for 6,000 arrests in the last couple of years. This basically catch and release program, the big backlog of trials. So the day that I met Chris, he was assaulted about 5 minutes after I met him here in Ottawa. And the police followed up with him a couple months later and said, well, this is a kind of a misdemeanor. We've got 5,000 case backlog in the court system, so we're not going to pursue the charges. And they basically told Chris that even though he was assaulted, they weren't going to do anything about it. And this was not a trans person. This was a self-appointed punch and turf vigilante. TERF, if you're not familiar, is trans exclusionary radical feminist. It's the label that everyone who is critical of these things gets thrown at them at least once. And this guy jumped out of a car and assaulted Chris. I heard him say he's been assaulted more than 20 times now. I have some criticism for Chris. I'm not fawning over him. He is a provocateur, and he's chosen to be a provocateur to raise awareness. Right? If it wasn't controversial what he was doing, he wouldn't get any attention. So he seeks controversy. And a particular day, Trans Day of Visibility, which is supposed to be all about promoting trans, to walk into the middle of the crowd, or at least walk into where the events are happening and be present, is there's a bit of passive aggressive thing going on there that, and I get where Chris is coming from. I believe he's correct that a person shouldn't be able to come up and get into your space and then have the cops say, well, you were too close to him when he's trying to get away. He doesn't seek out violence most of the time, unless he's really in trouble. He's not raising his hands. He's just taking punches. And when he was assaulted in front of me, his hands were behind his back, and he just took it. And really, that's the only way, because the potential for escalation is huge. And that crowd psychosis that starts to happen, it's really a borderline riot. Yes. And if Chris pushes back and then the crowd jumps in, they'll rip him apart. And that's not an exaggeration or hyperbole. This is the kind of thing, and we're in this particular weird spot post-pandemic, because post-pandemic, all through history, there's been things like this, witch hunts and inquisitions and purges of gypsies and Jews that recur over and over again. It's the other, the outsider, who gets targeted, the one who's different, and this kind of psychosis focuses on targets. And I pray that Chris is safe and he stays safe, and I'm really humbled by his courage that he's shown so many times in dealing with these kinds of things.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that insight too. I mean, and I tend to not be one that wants to provoke people, but I won't back down. Because I'm not going to back down from truth. And so speaking in the marketplace is really, really important. And we need to keep doing it. And more people, more parents, particularly, and grandparents. I want to put a challenge out to you, grandparents. I have 12 grandchildren. You know, I have a stake in this, man. My grandchildren are precious to me. And guess what? They're male and they're female. Hello. And I won't stop speaking about biological truth, a dignity of humanity. Like, we need to keep speaking out, but we need more people to do the same. And so I really thank you, Shannon, for being with us, because you're doing some really good work. I want to have you back and to talk, if you're willing, to some of the research you're involved in, if you can talk about some of that sometime. And we'll make sure John is here. It's just been kind of one of those days because you're flying out and I wanted to catch you. And we want to talk about some of the things that you're doing research-wise, and I think it's going to be pretty enlightening for parents and for.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to sharing. We've got some big data results coming in a couple of weeks, and I think it's going to provide a lot of valuable insights.
Awesome. Well, maybe you're back from holidays in a week or so we might just catch you when you fly back in. We'll be in touch.
All right. Always a pleasure.
That's great. Brad?
Thank you very much to both of you, Shannon, Dr. Ann. It's always a pleasure and always a world of information. We've learned a lot today. We've learned that the trans movement is in a place that is becoming aggressive. And we need to, as a society, take note of that. We need to make sure we do our due diligence and stand strong for our children and our vulnerable women. I'm Brad Wilder. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement with your host, John Euler. I'll see you next time.